Now that Vesper's host is out, contest mode is over. I wanted to talk about my experience with contest mode. I want to talk about my experience with the dungeon, what I think about it, what I don't like, what I do like, and just everything, connected to it. Bungie put out a tweet today pretty much asking how do we fare, how did you think about it, and I just wanted to make a quick video discussing that. For the most part, I talked about it on my stream after getting the completion. I think this dungeon is easily the best dungeon they've done in at least a couple years. Looking at a lot of the other dungeons recently, we've had Warlord's Ruin, Ghosts of the Deep, Spire of the Watcher, Duality. Personally, this is my favorite dungeon that they have put out since Grasp of Avarice. Grasp of Avarice was a really fun dungeon, while difficult. The last couple of dungeons, they've been kind of really ramping up the mechanics, ramping up the difficulty, and while I don't have an issue with that, I do find that some of them have been definitely kind of boring and quite a chore to play on subsequent playthroughs after the first experience. But even on the first experience, I didn't feel like, man, this was really, really dope. Warlord's Ruin, I did feel that way, at least for the aesthetic, but the combat itself I didn't really enjoy, and I guess it's because of the enemy that we're fighting. Duality, if you've been around stream, you know how I feel about Duality. I think it's one of the worst things they've ever put out. Spire of the Watcher, while fun, it's just, not a lot going for it. This dungeon is really, really good. I don't even think we can call it a dungeon. This is straight up a mini raid. There's way more mechanics, way more, team-oriented things going on than really any other dungeon we've had in a long time. That is a really good thing. My only worry, and I have talked about this with a lot of other people, is that from a solo experience, these dungeons are starting to become trying, I guess is the best way to, put it. I haven't done my solo yet, as of the making of this video, but that's what I plan on doing. I plan on doing my solo flawless, and I can definitely see juggling all this stuff and having to do all these things, and also having to do some really, really insane damage. This guy has almost 20 million health, the final boss. And I can definitely see the amount of people going for solo flawless in this dungeon to be just as low as Warlord's Ruin, or even, lower. Especially because the artifact doesn't really push itself towards solo flawless. But this dungeon, for the most part, is really, really good. I enjoy it. I do plan on, doing this dungeon pretty often. And obviously, Icebreaker's back. And while Icebreaker may not be the version it was in D1, could be really, really neat with the whole fire and ice ignition shatter thing going on. My biggest issue with the final boss, which this is probably the only issue that I can think of, because the pacing of this dungeon is really, really good. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of, high threat, lethal enemies, so you can kind of put your build to the biggest potential and still kind of have to, juggle constantly, like maybe dying. And you don't just steamroll the content. But my biggest issue is the final boss just feels like a chore. Each damage phase, while it's very, very long, like I think the damage phase in this dungeon is like 1.5 minutes, which is one of the longest we've had in a single dungeon or even raid scenario. I have to say, having to do the whole going to one side, scanning, killing the Atrax clone and depositing, then going to the other side is quite a draw. I was looking at my footage of our first playthrough, and getting to damage and doing damage, and that whole leading up, being in the front room, all that from the moment you start to getting to damage is about 30 minutes long. And granted, you can make it go back quicker now, but it takes a long time to move through all these paces and go from one side to the other side, do all the scanning, do all the operating, do all the suppressing, and then go to damage. It is definitely a chore. And while it might be really fun on normal, on contest, man, you had to go slow, and it takes a lot to be mentally focused for 30 minutes, you know, doing one side, doing the other, getting to DPS, and then going back down and having to do it again, and then having to do that all again. And I don't know if I like the direction that they're taking with these dungeons. While I really enjoy them on a first playthrough experience, I wonder if calling these things a dungeon, I wonder if we need to give it a different name, because now if you look at all the dungeons in the game, while they were built under different raid and dungeon teams, while that is, you know, everyone has a different philosophy on what they think a raid and a dungeon should be, it's quite obvious that the current team is looking at these dungeons as actual raids, but with 3 people in mind, with the fact that maybe some crazy persons out there might want to do it by themselves. Or I guess better way of explaining it is with the understanding that the mechanics should have enough leeway that someone or maybe 2 people can do them without having to have all 3 people available. For example, in Deepstone Crypt, the raid, you have an operator, you have a scanner, you have a suppressor, you have the nuclear radiation thing, and all those things kind of have lockout periods where you can't do it again, someone else has to do it. Those are gone. The radiation builds up and goes down way faster than it does in the raid. And also picking up a nuclear core, you can either hold it or drop it, versus in a raid you have to pick it up and hold it the entire time. Once again, it's just proving that Deepstone Crypt and all of the things surrounding it is just peak Destiny content, at least one of the peak Destiny content, you know, locations. This dungeon is really good. I really enjoy it, and I'm curious what you think about the dungeon as well. I know there have been some people that have complained about how tedious the contest mode is, but I never think it's fair to judge a dungeon or a raid based off of the contest mode alone. I guarantee people are already just cruising through this dungeon in no time, but it does lead the question of, should contest mode be around 24/7? Should we start having, you know, contest mode and other versions of content that, you know, allows players to push themselves in aspirational pursuits and content? I do think so. The one thing, even though I'm not too sure how I feel about the direction of raids and dungeons in the future, if you look at Salvation's Edge and you look at Warlord's Ruin and you look at Vesper's Host, it's obvious the people at the raid and dungeon team are really trying to amp up the mechanics and ramp up the, you know, difficulty and just the experience. And I don't know what that's going to look like in a year, but I would much rather all this content look a little bit more like it is now and a lot less like Spire of the Watcher and Root of Nightmares. If you have done Vesper's Host, let me know your experience. Let me know how you feel about the current state of raids and dungeons and moving forward in them. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.